Welcome back. We are now with our last guest, last but by no means least. It's a favourite on the Virtual Study Day sofa, and that is Linda Jones from the library. Good morning, Linda.
Good morning, and good morning to everybody else.
And joined by Linda's friend,
Pablo, the penguin.
Pablo the penguin. Linda, before we start, because people will be watching and maybe a little confused by our second guest, who is Pablo the penguin?
Pablo the penguin is a IT superstar, recognised last year by JISC as one of the biggest attractions to getting students involved with the library. And he appears on our blog, in cartoons along the library website, and you can see him popping up all over the campus whenever there's an event.
And he's even got his own student card.
He's got his own student card. He has a mini assistant called Pip, and they go around the library creating chaos.
Fantastic. So if anyone has got any questions for Pablo, please do click on the comment button below, and Pablo will do his best.
Yes.
Perhaps with Linda's assistance to answer those questions.
Yes. He's an expert on fishing and fish, so he's very aware of our stocks in those areas.
Maybe not quite useful for our students
No.
in terms of their essay writing, but you never know. You never know. There's something on piracy, fishing may come into it.
Yes.
We are talking all things literature searching today, Linda, and I think that's something particularly for our new students that can be a bit of an unknown quantity when they first start, because in a good way, I suppose, we've got an enormous amount of resources available to students. So let's say I am a brand new student, I've been given my essay title. Where do I start?
Well, certainly not deciding on the answer to your question.
Yes.
To start with, I think the really important thing is to look as much as you can for the guidance that's being given to you. Now, as you said, we've got millions of pieces of material in our library catalogue and through our discovery tool, but it is very easy to drown in all that information. So I usually suggest, particularly to first year students, that the best place to start is the reading list for the unit. If you start with the reading list, you can see that your lecturer's taken quite a lot of care in choosing things which offer contrasting viewpoints, that perhaps give you a bit more historical background, and that perhaps also give you the opportunity to then do some independent research, but with a very clear idea that this is going to be academic. The other big failing is it is pointless Googling. There are times when I actually prescribe Googling for particular subject areas or for particular topics, but those are limited and you need to know what you're doing. So rather than starting with Google, I would always finish with Google if I wanted to clear up things around current legislation, current government policy, perhaps industry opinion, but nowhere else. Certainly not looking for random essays written by all sorts of people for all sorts of purposes and nothing to do with your particular topic.
Yeah. That's interesting advice. I've not come across that before, that you should finish with Google. And that was something I was talking about with Nathan earlier about dissertations, is making sure that you've got an awareness of what's going on currently. And I suppose that's where it is useful to check that you're really up to date with current developments.
Yes.
But not as a starting point, however tempting it might be.
With my other law hat on, I know that people have got to the end of dissertations and suddenly discovered that an amendment to an act has been passed, and that does rather wreck the whole thing. So it is, you may need to sort of keep a weather eye open when it's at that sort of crucial stage, but early on I think it's just doing a check towards the end of your process. But I will admit there is this attraction from Google because it all seems simple.
But we also have something that's very simple as well on the library website, which is Discoverer.
Yes. Not quite as simple as Google.
No.
Basically, on the library website, you have two places to search. You have Discovery, and that is ideal if what you are looking for are academic articles. What I would say is I wouldn't use Discovery to find books. There is another tab which says Catalogue, and that will find you books, both electronic and print, and it will also find you print journals that which we don't have electronically. Now that sounds like it's excluding distance learners, all this print stuff. It doesn't mean that. One of the things you should do before you're even approached with the first essay is to actually explore the library website and see that there is support there for distance learners. If you are in this country, you can have books posted to you, so there is no need to say that you're excluded from our print collection. Books take time to post though, and I'm afraid you are expected to post them back to us, which actually costs money. So what you might try doing is thinking about using them strategically, and perhaps thinking about using chapters from books. Now, if that was a Jane Austen novel, it would be like sort of ripping the heart out of something, and you wouldn't be able to understand the story or whatever. But particularly in criminology, there are a wealth of books which are not single author books, but are edited books collecting together the views of a large number of people. And those actually, the chapters are virtually isolated little essays on particular things. And those are ideal. Using your reading list or from Google Books, you can actually find the contents pages for those books. And you can actually ask us to send you a PDF version of a particular chapter. This means if you start early, that by the time that you leave university, you will have built up a library of your own to keep forever of all sorts of interesting articles. So that's another way of doing it. Now, those of you that are perhaps operating from overseas will not be able to receive the printed books by post. So the articles and chapters scanned are the option for you. Having said which, there is an enormous market in second-hand books, and it is very easy to pick up cheap second-hand versions of the older texts. It is the older texts which tend not to necessarily be available electronically. Wherever possible, when I get a book order from a member of staff, I check to see if we can get both a print and an electronic version, because I do understand that different students have different preferences, not necessarily because of where they are, but perhaps simply about how they cope with reading.
Yeah. And you mentioned Discoverer.
Discoverer.
There.
Discovery. I think we could interchange.
Which is really useful for academic journal articles, which I was talking about with Gordon, are really, really nice to see in student essays. And you've got so many options when you're in that search engine, haven't you? Because you can ask for things that are directly available from the library, things that have been reviewed by other authors to make sure they're really top quality research, things that are a particular time period in terms of publication dates. So you can see a real scope of things that are out there, can't you?
And that all works from the sidebar, where you get what Discovery call our limiters. The only problem with that is that occasionally, if you build up too complicated a search in Discovery and then add something else in, once you do the search, you might discover you've lost some of your limiters. So I recommend, particularly early on, is starting with the idea of going for a key concept each time, and then doing the limiting on that concept.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Now, in Discovery, once you have done a search, and you will have to have logged in to do that search, so it's quite obvious that Discovery knows who you are, it will save the search for you. You can build up 4 or 5 different single concept searches, but you can then combine them and do a search including 2 or 3 terms and find the overlap.
Yeah.
It's a really good way of narrowing down your findings. The important thing is that Discovery searches almost everything. So it will bring stuff back that is totally irrelevant to you.
But you can discard a lot of that, can't you?
Yes.
If you want to.
It's being clear, and I think it's about narrowing your options
absolutely.
as much as possible.
Because you don't want 3 million research results.
No.
It's not helpful.
No, but it does help us show off how brilliant our collection is and how big it is.
It certainly does. You mentioned right at the start there about navigating the library website and making sure in your initial, when you're starting your studies with us, that you have the time to do that. And I suppose we should always highlight the Body in the Library exercise, which students can still access via their Getting Started website, which is a fantastic game where students, through playing a game of Cluedo, learn all of the different resources that we have in the library. So if students haven't done that, they really should, shouldn't they?
Yes, it really is a way of just introducing what we think are the key points about using the library properly. Having said that, there are other things that might hinder you using the library properly. So if you do have problems, do be aware that on the front page and on every page of the library website there is a little speech bubble, and if you use that speech bubble, you will be connected to someone who's happy to chat with you online. We have somebody in the library answering that from 9 till 5 every day, and at 5 o'clock we switch it over and hand it to some lovely people in America and Australia who are happy to sit through the night and answer questions.
And it's really, I mean, I've used it myself a couple of times when I've not been able to locate something, and it's fabulous. You're not talking to someone with a made-up name. You know, they are actually the person in the library, and they offer you really good advice. And if they don't know, they pop off and find out for you and come back. And it's a fabulous service because you can get instant answers to your questions.
And with the people that are in America and Australia, we give them really clear briefing notes about common questions and how to answer them. We also alert them to anything that might have gone wrong in the library during the day. So if a particular source actually fails because there's a computing problem at the other end, they will know about it, and they will tell you not to worry and go away and do something else.
Yeah, brilliant.
We also check their answers next morning. And I can say that I'm only aware of one really major blunder, but it was rather amusing in that someone actually had checked in overnight to see how they got to a particular seminar room on the campus. And unfortunately, the lady in America who answered forgot that they weren't in Washington and sent them a map of how to get to seminar 201. But it was in totally the wrong university, in totally the wrong country.
We would hope that the student
I think
didn't
they
take
must
it
have
literally.
realised. But we check those answers first thing in the morning, and we contact students directly if we think they have been in any way misled or left with insufficient information.
That's great. So don't be confused, don't be out there not knowing what to do. Click on that button. We should probably, we've talked about what you should do, we should probably go on to talk about what you shouldn't do now. And we've got our top 4 errors when you're searching for information. So we'll go through these and see what we come up with. First of all, Linda, is not understanding how to access electronic resources.
Yes, I think we're all guilty of this. We want what we want, and we want it now.
Yes.
Unfortunately, library systems are not quite like Google Books or Amazon that will deliver at the moment, the minute that you answer. You do actually have to prove that you've got the rights to use them. And that introduces us to the wonders of something called shibboleth. Some of you may already be sick and tired of seeing this, but it is really important that you understand that that is literally a gateway which keeps invaders out. And basically, we buy this material for you. We don't want other people hogging it and you not being able to get to it. So, shibboleth requires a username and password. You don't have to have a new one. You just remember what you're using in Moodle. But the important thing is, first of all, to tell it that you're from the University of Portsmouth. And the annoying thing is that we end up really down the bottom of a very, very long list when you go through the list.
And sometimes we're University of Portsmouth, and I have seen us as Portsmouth University.
Yes.
So if you don't find us under U, we may be under P.
Yes, P is better, but I personally would like to rechristen the university ABC University.
That's a good idea.
Yes.
Be at the top of the list.
Yes.
But as you say, sometimes you first of all have to say that you're in the UK, don't you? Because
Yes.
the first choice is UK, Australia, USA.
Yes, and it's a UK Access Management Federation that you belong to.
Yeah. So let's go through this. The first thing that students are looking for, if it looks like, and I know many of our students get confused about this because they see a pay button and they don't have anything to do with that, they are looking for the word shibboleth, aren't they?
They are looking, first of all, for institutional access.
Okay, because they belong to our institution.
You're accessing because you belong to the University of Portsmouth. You can circumvent this occasionally. I'm afraid at the moment I'm having a lot of problems with this at home, and I think it's got something to do with my internet. But if you install the VPN,
virtual private network,
which means that you are sort of already encased within the university, when you log on, a number of our resources will recognise you. There are still some resources which are particularly heavily protected, such as British standards and some of our legal databases. They might want you to actually prove again that you are who you say you are, but it does cut out quite a lot of this. If VPN fails, then you can get in contact with IS and they will sort it out for you, and they have done that for me 3 times this week because I'm really not very IT literate, so they can sort it out.
So you're looking for the institutional login, you're looking for UK, you're looking for perhaps shibboleth, and you're looking for University of Portsmouth, and then it's your username and password, isn't it? And then you should have access for free, that's the important bit, isn't it, to all of the electronic resources that we've got on offer to our students.
Yes, if we've purchased it, you should be able to download it, read it anywhere you like, or read it online.
And once students have got to grips with this, and it may seem a little complicated, it's less complicated, I think, than perhaps we're making it out. But once you've got access to all of this, then it should be relatively straightforward to do it the next time and the next time and the next time.
Yes.
And as we've been saying all the way through today with Nathan, with Gordon, it's about the quality of the evidence that you can produce in your essays that makes for a better essay. So it's a really important stage of development for students, isn't it? Getting to grips with the library resources, getting to grips with the library website, learning how to search for better information.
Yeah. And what I would say, if anybody is struggling with anything that actually appears to be about university procedures or policies within the library, then don't sit at home and worry about it. A phone call and an email, and we can set up an individual appointment with you. And just as IS can come and look at your machine, we can actually watch you do a search and tell you what you're doing wrong.
Yeah, fabulous.
And point out, the problem with lots of websites is there's lots of detail up in the top corners that you just miss because you're so anxious to get to what you want.
Yeah.
And if somebody's watching and can tell you exactly where you're going wrong, it can actually change your life in terms of how easily you can do your research.
And students, especially distance learning students, should really take advantage of this, because I think I often get emails from students. I got 2 yesterday. I'm so sorry for bothering you. This is what we're here for. This is what we're here for. We're supporting campus-based students all over campus. We want to do the same for distance learning students, don't we? So you're absolutely right. Don't sit at home being confused or give up. Keep going. Right. Number 2.
Using Google.
Yes.
Not my favourite occupation. But the basic thing to remember is that Google actually is going to give you what it thinks you want or what it wants to sell you. So I would suggest that you can protect yourself a bit from the selling up option by using Google Scholar.
Ah, good. I was hoping you wouldn't bar me from using Google Scholar. If our students don't know, what is Google Scholar?
Google Scholar is a sort of academic version of Google, and it will find you scholarly material. It's identifiable. It tells you who the author is, and the author's probably got a profile as well on Google, so you can check them out. Google Scholar will pull in things that we don't buy, and it may find you free PDFs of some things, so it can be useful. I particularly like it because it helps you to track things backwards, so you can see who this person has cited, but you can do that with almost anything you use from the library. But more importantly, you can see that the top results are going to be the most heavily used, and you can see who's cited them and perhaps who's cited them most recently. So suddenly, from looking at something which is ancient history in terms of criminology, you can come up to something that was written last month. And that's where perhaps you might actually be introducing your own original research into your essay. So as we talked about having to keep up with the news sometimes about changes, using Google Scholar is a way to just keep up with newly released stuff. And again, some of that really newly released stuff will be available freely because it's put on publishers' website to draw subscriptions.
Yes.
So you might get that free and for gratis even if we don't take the journal.
Brilliant. So don't use Google at the beginning of your searches. You are allowed to very briefly use it at the end, but Google Scholar is a reasonable search tool. Number 3, not going to the original source.
Yes, you get yourself into terrible complications. As cited by and all the rest. It takes up a lot of word count, and it doesn't actually tell the lecturer that you've done anything besides read the textbook. It's also the fact that people don't actually understand necessarily what they're looking at. So it may come as a surprise to some people that press releases issued by the government of speeches they are about to make can actually not be accurate representations of what is said on the day. So it's important to think about the timeline of what it is that you've got in front of you and its particular worth.
And I always think if you're citing something heavily, you should try to find the original source if you can. And if it's easily accessible in the library, there's almost no excuse for it. And the difficulty in reporting what someone else has said about someone else's work and what someone else has is that you're not necessarily getting what they said. If I'm trying to understand what Gordon said to you earlier and you've told me that Gordon said to you earlier, I'm not sure we're getting the full story here. I need to go to Gordon and find out what he said rather than having your interpretation of what he said. So
because we all filter things.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, and I think as well, distinguishing between government policy indicators and actual legislation. One's got legal force, the other may only be an academic discussion still.
And that's, I suppose, a danger as well of using newspaper reports, because newspaper reports, as you know, will often cite data, but they will often cite their interpretation of the data. If they're citing the data, there's no reason why the student can't go and find the data and use that.
And good newspaper sources always refer you to their data. So the Guardian's particularly good at this. But of course, newspapers can be distorted somewhat, and I'm afraid my assistant Sharon is American, and I am constantly bombarded with fake news from America from her as to how outrageous it can be. But I think that the latest thing is actually people printing false versions of the Washington Post to distribute in Washington.
Oh, goodness. I was very interested in this, actually, Linda. I saw a newspaper article about this the other day, that there's a new search engine that Microsoft has got. It's called Microsoft Edge, that issues warnings about certain websites. And one of those is the Daily Mail website, where it says, if you search for the Daily Mail, it says, proceed with caution. This website generally fails to maintain basic standards of accuracy and accountability. So there are warnings now about these particular sites.
And people do need to be aware that this happens. I think possibly in this country we're quite used to the fact that there are political biases and particular bends in our news sources. I don't think there's quite so much outright lying, perhaps. But if you go to another country, you are going to have to think about the political biases, but perhaps the religious biases or other things which are influencing news reporting in that area.
So students need to be quite discerning, don't they? And that's, I suppose, an advantage of looking for multiple sources. So not relying on one source of evidence to prove or disprove what you're saying, but actually to look at a variety of sources in order to offer a bit more. Excellent. And finally, and importantly, Linda, is this one.
Right, well, we've already talked about that. Before you give up, you contact someone.
Absolutely.
They will help. It might be me, it might be Sarah, it might be Gordon, but if you've got a problem, don't sit there and stew.
Yeah, because there are so many sources of support out there for our distance learning students. So it's really important. And if you can bear in mind some of these errors and take some of the advice that Linda's been talking about today, the advice that Nathan and I were talking about, the advice that Gordon was talking about, using lots of different types of evidence, being discerning with your evidence, knowing how to search. If you can incorporate some of this advice in your essays, hopefully we'll see some more content students and some higher marks coming out.
And I'll have more to do.
And Pablo
Which
will be
I
busy.
enjoy. And Pablo will help.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Linda. As ever, really informative and really useful guidance for our students out there.